Hello, good afternoon. Once again, this is Shankar Swaminathan. I have not been coming here to present for quite some time, but it's always happy to share my ideas with you. And some tragic occurrence or incident takes place upon which I feel like sharing my ideas. I do feel like coming here, and it acts more as an emotional outlet for me too. Now, this is actually about the case of Sushant Singh Rajput, and he's committing suicide allegedly. I'm not sure if they have actually confirmed that he has committed suicide, but I think that's what it was alleged, I believe. Um, by all accounts, this is a very promising actor, a darling of the masses, a brilliant mind, a very sharp intellect, who chose to sacrifice uh, the the promise of pursuing his career in the United States. I believe he actually got its scholarship from Stanford University, one of the top Ivy League universities in the United States. But he chose to sacrifice that in order to pursue his own aspirations, which was to become an actor. It's not an easy thing to do at all. But perhaps, as it has transpired, um, perhaps Bollywood is not the place where he should have been. Though acting possibly was very much his cup of tea, and he would have really shown, he would have had a lot more to show on that front for the coming decades. Bollywood, possibly, which is a treacherous dog eat dog world kind of thing, it was possibly not. It was not possible, perhaps, for somebody like Sushant to survive there. It possibly appears that Sushant was not cut out exactly for surviving this kind of machinations, so to speak, or possibly scheming and the petty politics of Bollywood. Okay. Anyway, that's so distressing, so sad, absolutely. But that's not our topic of discussion today. I was actually thinking about, I was actually wondering if it's not possible to minimize the kind of such occurrences, even if not prevent them totally. Okay. And I've been a mental health professional for quite some time, for many years in Canada. And as one who have come across quite a few cases like this, case of suicide, um, I thought I should share my ideas. It also provides me with a kind of emotional outlet for me, to so to speak, because this one definitely affected me sort of um, um, quite a bit. Okay. Um, so I thought I'll just come before you. That's the reason why I'm here today. Okay. Uh, Celebrity suicides. Before I just do plan to discuss a little bit about concept of suicide, how the government's intervention could help minimize the incidences, etc. I also thought I would a little discuss about the social conditions that exist that possibly aggravate the situation where the tendency for suicide is actively, if not necessarily encouraged willingly, it's actually it facilitates the condition for people to think about suicide. That's kind of thing. Discontentment, frustration, disappointment, etc. All of those things. Okay. Every celebrity suicide, it actually comes to the attention of people. It draws attention of the mass media and everyone, and it shocks everybody without a doubt. Any death shocks, Okay, it's and suicide particularly definitely shocks, and when it's resorted to by somebody like Sushant Rajput, um, it see, in the case of actors, what happens is they become like our next door boy. Okay, you really feel so close to them emotionally. People feel so, it really definitely shocks people. It makes them feel very disappointed and sad. So the celebrity suicides are of that nature. So it attracts the attention of the masses, as I said. Um, but for every one such celebrity suicide in India, I am somehow inclined to believe that there must be hundreds and thousands of such suicides committed by the common man. What with the societal conditions being what it is, okay, frustration, disappointment, disillusionment, uh, all of these things driving people to destroy themselves, to escape the problems. Um, so there is every possibility there must be hundreds and thousands of suicides being committed there, though the statistics from India is not really very reliable. Okay, it may not be possible actually to provide very uh, reliable statistics too, with the population being what it is. Okay, so that's, but how is, what is it that the government has can do in this? Uh, Before we actually talk about what the governments can do in India, let's also talk about how is it is being done in countries like Canada. And even before going into that, let's actually discuss a little more about the concept of suicide as such. Why do people commit suicide? Suicides are not only a symptom of something else. Suicides are basically a fallout of something else. Okay, suicide is basically not the first step that is being contemplated by somebody. Suicides are basically a fallout of societal conditions impacting the individual. Uh, so the environment about the individual drives the individual to committing suicide. Okay, um, it could be economic, it could be social, it could be anything. But the fact remains that in very psychological terms, when the individual with the propensity to commit suicide does not have the level of tolerance required to put up with the stress. The level of tolerance could be different for different people. But when a particular individual, given his unique situations, is not able to tolerate the stress, there is a stage. So he feels that what's the point? Why? Why to be doing this? Why to be doing this? What so why how is it that I can actually escape from this stress? How can I get out of this in a very emotional psychological sense? That's a stage when he thinks about destroying himself. Okay, so it's a good question if somebody were to ask, why is it that not everyone actually thinks about on those lines? Personalities are different. It depends upon how the personalities have shaped up over time. Again, that has got a lot of other psychological parameters by which it has to be discussed. The person's upbringing, the background, the kind of values, the kind of parentage, families in the teens, in the adolescence, all kind, in the childhood. So many factors actually go into that. Let's not go into that right now because that's a very elaborate subject. This person has a propensity to commit suicide. This person has a low level of tolerance for stress. Okay, or the stress level is so high that even a person with a very high level of tolerance is not able to stand it. He's not able to put up with this anymore. So he contemplates. But suicide is not the first step. Suicide comes over a period, over thinking about self annihilation. It actually crystallizes over a period of time. Okay, it could be a short period, it could be a long period. But once the idea actually creeps into the person's mind that I'm going to destroy myself, I'm going to think about it, then he starts fancying the idea. That provides a kind of psychological relief to the person from the problems that he is actually facing right now, right then. So he fancies the idea, then he thinks about the methods, measures by which he can actually do that. Then at a particular point in time when there is a triggering factor which drives him to a point, the idea might have already crystallized, Now the moment has come, then he feels like he has got the implements to do that, he's got the tools to do that, he's got the ideas to do that. So that's the moment when he decides about doing it, when he goes about with the action. So this is what it is. Essentially, in professional terms, it's called stress tolerance level, stress intolerance, you can call it. Okay, I'm just going to give a comparison in physical terms. Assuming that there is a very physically weak person being forced to the corner, he is forced to confront another man, another very strong bully with a weapon in his hand, out to kill this man for whatever reason. This weaker person is forced to the corner, and he doesn't have the determination, he doesn't have the will to fight, he doesn't have the ability to fight. What does he do? He can only beg and plead. Now, begging and pleading is not going to be fruitful. That's not going to be a dividend. That's not going to help him, because the other person is not going to consider his request. So what happens is, at a particular stage, he reconciles himself, he resigns himself to his fate, and decides to submit himself to the person. In fact, at that stage, he would be you will be feeling relieved, and you will be happy if the action is done as early as possible. You have seen a lot of videos that have been brought out by this ISIS terrorists, where they do the mass murders, or they carry out the murders, and these are all basically very morbid videos. They come up with the videos, and we've seen all of that. That's the stage. So this person becomes so weak, he loses his determination, he loses his will to fight, he resigns himself, he reconciles himself to his fate and the ultimate annihilation. You apply the same thing to the case of somebody with a mental health issue. Okay, this person with a mental health issue, person who is deeply depressed, he has actually lost all the will to fight. He doesn't have the determination anymore. He doesn't have the resilience. Okay, so he sort of, in a way, succumbs to the situation. He resigns himself to the fate. He just wants to escape. That's the only thing. So that's the stage when he decides to resort to commit suicide. Okay, so that's really very sad. That's very distressing. This is actually the concept of suicide in brief. I'm not good. So let us now come to what the governments can do. How it is being done in governments, like in countries like Canada, United States. I'm actually talking about Canada because I have been in Canada for a pretty long time, and I have seen these things firsthand with myself. And I had with humility, I can also say that I had the opportunity to be a little useful on these occasions, helping to save lives a little bit. Okay, that's what it is. The one of the things that I actually have when I talk about the situation in Canada, one of the things that I need to talk about is the client's support system available. The government allocates a sizable amount of funds, and the funds are being routed through non-profit organizations, which are called NGOs in India. In Canada, they are called non-profit organizations. Okay, they route the fund through the non-profit organizations. Non-profit organizations have under the roles mental health workers, mental health counselors, sometimes psychologists, psychiatrists. Okay, and besides that, so the whole support system works for the client in distress. Even community policing could be involved there. There is somebody called crisis intervention worker, mobile crisis teams. So many things are there. Okay, what is actually happening is that the client is being monitored on a very continuing basis, consistent basis, regular basis. It's being done very systematically. Okay, in the process, the client himself is being educated. The client is helped to develop insight into his conditions. So the client is encouraged to talk about his conditions very freely. Okay, there is no stigma attached. Okay, so that really helps the client quite a bit. The client feels a kind of empowered when he realizes that he has got so much of support system here. Okay, that really helps the client. The counselor helps the clients to feel empowered, helps the client to feel hopeful about his situation, provides alternative approaches to the client. Okay, the counselor tries his best to enable the client see the senselessness in trying to commit suicide. Though the client is encouraged to talk about his ideation, etc. But this is a constant process, very consistent process. This is being done in a very systematic fashion. So the client is also actually helped with the phone number of the mobile crisis. Okay, because it's not possible for the counselor to be with the client all the 24 hours. So the client is being given the mobile crisis number. So if there is a crisis, if he feels a crisis, for example, suddenly in the midnight, the client gets into a mood of depression, and he feels like committing suicide. He feels like doing whatever that he has been thinking about all along, how to commit and all that. He's planning to go with the process. Okay. So at that moment, he remembers what the counselor has actually told him. Just pick up the phone and talk. So he picks up the phone, calls the mobile crisis number, and tells them, "Oh, I am not feeling well." All that. That much is enough actually. Okay. The mobile crisis worker at the other end knows what the client is talking about. So she or he tries to calm down the client. Then if she or he feels it's not possible, then a social worker is actually dispatched at whatever time to the client's place, possibly along with even a police officer. Then the client is talked to and they make an assessment, and the client is taken to the hospital, psychiatric ward. Trust me, the client will become okay in just about 1 or 2 days with medication. But the client is kept there for about a week or so. His condition is stabilized, then he is discharged, he goes back home. This is how things are managed. Okay. By this approach, what happens is, to a very great extent, to a very substantial extent, the incidences of suicides can be brought down very significantly. So this is basically in brief, and this is exactly what needs to be done in India. If someone is going to say, "Oh no, those things are possible in a country like Canada, America, in India with the huge population," I mean, you can come up with any number of excuses to say that it's not possible in India. I beg to disagree absolutely. It doesn't cost much. All that is needed is just the willingness of the government. Okay, willingness and determination, and the government's realization and ability to see the seriousness of the issue. I'm also not willing to blame the government in whatever government in India, central government, state government, or whatever setup is there. I'm just not prepared to blame them for the simple reason that they have a host of issues. I do understand that the population is huge, host of issues. Though that may not necessarily be an excuse totally, I'm very well able to understand the magnitude of the problem there. They have a host of issues. It has to necessarily go with the priority, the funding allocation, all kinds of things. But still, I do believe it's possible because the funding is not really very huge in this. All that needs to be done is the establishment of structures, organizations. There are plenty of people, I'm sure, who would be prepared to lend their services, professionals. Okay, so the government only has to take the initiative and promote measures and establish the structures, which is possible. Because see, I was actually making my preliminary basic research through Google to see how many organizations are there in India to support such people with suicidal ideation. Not other mental health issues, depression and all that, that's completely different. Only people with suicidal ideation I'm talking about here. How many organizations? Unfortunately, I was not able to find more than 5 or 6. Possibly my further research would have led me to find more, but only this many I could actually see there. One of which is Snega, that I have known for a long time. Snega has been doing a remarkable work in Madras, Chennai for a long time. Okay, all they do, they have their own counselors. The client could possibly call them at any time. People with suicidal ideation, people who feel helpless. So they could call. The counselors will talk to them over phone and I'm not exactly sure how they are doing it in India, but I know how they do it here. Possibly in India, my feeling is that they would tell the client to come to the office sometime tomorrow, next day, or whatever, and the counselors may make an assessment. But if the situation warrants, the clients could be referred to the psychiatrists, physicians, who would also possibly administer medication if they feel it is necessary, because they will have, the psychiatrist only can make the diagnosis. They can, the counselors can make only the initial assessment. Diagnosis is in a completely different category, which it could be done only by a psychiatrist professional, psychiatrist physician. So they would make the diagnosis, and they would maybe likely administer medication, and they would stabilize the client's condition. This is being done now, okay, by organizations like Snega, but that would be my inkling is that would be touching only the tip of the iceberg in India, considering the huge population and the societal conditions as they exist, where there is a lot of scope for frustration and discontentment, particularly with the country, with the vast majority of the urban middle class taking to the Western way of life with materialism and consumerism. There is bound to be more disappointment and disillusionment, trust me. Okay? People like to have more and more, they cannot have everything, and they are going to be disappointed, and they are going to feel frustrated, and it may lead to depression. It may lead to depression. Depression may lead to the idea of suicide. Okay, so that's what it is about. So we have actually discussed the concept of suicide. It can be discussed for any length of time. There is a lot that we can actually talk on, because the issue is really very complex. But there's only one more thing that I really want to talk about. That's the kind of half-baked information that we really come across in the social media. Because recently I happened to come across something in WhatsApp group messages where they were equating, somebody was attempting to equate, or possibly in effect by the message, maybe the intention was quite good, but the effect was actually equating ideas like sadness, sorrow, even frustration, discontentment, disappointment, and all that with depression. No, depression is in a completely different category. Depression has a lot to do with one's emotions. Okay, you are not able to overcome depression with intellect, whereas you can overcome sorrow or sadness or frustration, even discontentment, with intellect. Okay, by rational thinking. If you don't have rational thinking, you can always go to some counselor who would provide you some rational thinking. Essentially, counselors provide you with a lot of hope, alternatives, rational thinking, perspectives, etc. incidentally. So it will be absolutely a folly to equate depression with ideas like sadness or sorrow. So let us not actually belittle this. Let us not minimize the gravity of the situation with half-baked information like that, with misinformation like that, with misinterpretation like that. Okay, this is essentially a psychological issue. Psychological issues will have to be dealt with only by a psychological mental health professional, or a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, because it's really, others can actually try to do it, but the point is you have to be trained to develop a lot of insight information to be able to see. Okay, again, I tend to actually expound a little more on that actually. See, in the case of counseling, what really happens is the counselor develops a relationship with the client. The client develops a lot of trust in the counselor only so long as the counselor has enough expertise and is mature enough to provide counseling the way it needs to be done. One wrong word from the counselor would make the client hate the counselor, because the client is not basically the normal state of mind. Keep that in. He's not a client. Doesn't really have a very rational thinking. Many of them. So the client may be ultra sensitive. Okay, so it has to be dealt with great care, absolute tenderness, and with a lot of professional expertise. The counselor himself evolves and improves in the process. The counselor becomes very careful about what he can talk, what he cannot talk, how he can present things, what kind of language he can use, the kind of tone that he has to use. So it's a very complicated thing, upon which somebody gains expertise only by practice. Okay, theories are there. So any half-baked information that you come across in social media, uh, develop a healthy curiosity. There's nothing wrong with that, but do not come to a conclusion without discussing it with a professional, particularly on very sensitive subjects such as suicides, depression, and mental health issues. Now, there is another thing that I wanted to talk about. Uh, there are plenty of things that I actually want to say on this. I can never exhaust myself completely, obviously, but this is something that's really worth saying, worth talking about in the present coronavirus context. In COVID, in dealing with COVID, there is the idea of contact tracing is really talked about by a lot of people as a very effective measure, trying to with a very proactive approach, trying to identify people with um coronavirus, asymptomatic people, as they actually call people with not showing any symptoms, but still people affected by coronavirus. So that kind of contact tracing is being done. They say it's really very effective. It would be very effective. Similar approach could possibly be done in the case of people with the ideation of suicide, people with the propensity for committing suicide. Okay, before somebody actually develops the idea of suicide within himself, it's always possible to identify such people and take proactive measures. Okay, so that would really help quite a lot. But in all of these things, the government's facilitating role would be of absolute crucial importance. I cannot really emphasize this enough. Okay, so dealing with mental health issues, supporting the hapless ones afflicted by such issues, and in the process saving lives is, in my view, should be the foremost among, or at least one of the foremost considerations that the government will have to keep in mind. Thank you very much. God bless you all.